Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the survivors, the ones that decided that we were worth listening to. First of all, my name, as mentioned, is Pierre Thauvette. Claret Asset Management is a bottom-up value investment manager. Manages about 1.7 billion. Quite a few years back, I developed, as an analyst, an interest in managed futures, which is the subject of my fund as a managed futures product. I will touch on the managed futures space and why you should have an interest in it, more than the details of how I manage my fund. If you want more details, the handout has quite a few numbers and additional information that you can delve into. So, the Claret Global Multi-Asset Fund operates in the managed futures industry. The managed futures industry dates back to the 80s. This particular chart starts from 1999, and it reached 350 billion, and the part of the chart that you see is the part where it has garnered a lot more interest from the investment marketplace. Most of obviously, the name managed futures is composed of many different approaches, many different ways of using futures. Basically, the expression is any manager that focuses on futures as an instrument and manages any number of positions could be considered a managed futures manager. One big thing about managed futures is that they tend to be systematic. Most of the money in that space is managed in a systematic fashion. The more markets the managers cover and look after, the more systematic they tend to be. And out of that systematic portion, most of them are trend followers. If an asset class goes up, they're long. If it goes down, they're short. If they don't know, they're out. That's basically the idea between that space. So why would or most of the money in that space go systematic? So the first thing I'm going to try to do is differentiate between two topics, which I'm suggesting, or I refer you to an article that I've read recently that I thought explains these concepts efficiently. It's by Daniel Kahneman, that you may know from his Nobel Prize. His article is Noise, How to Overcome the High Hidden Cost of Inconsistent Decision Making. So in this particular article, he showcases the difference between inconsistent decision making called noise versus the various biases that you can emotional biases that have been covered at length by other professionals or academics. So in his article, if I just take a step back, he mentions that humans are unreliable decision makers. Their judgments are strongly influenced by irrelevant factors, some of which are mood, time since the last meal, and the weather, whether it's nice or not outside. There's a lot of papers out there that demonstrate that humans are afflicted by these. And if you're in a position to make decisions, you have to know that you can succumb to the impact of that. So the variability in human judgments, when presented with similar facts, is called noise. So if someone's presented similar facts twice and he makes a different decision, that's the noise. You can measure that and you can try to do something about it. Noise is a source of errors distinct from those brought about by cognitive biases. I refer you to a pretty good resource to kind of have an understanding of the scope and the scale of the problem. There's a blog called Sci-Fi Blog, and there's a big list of behavioral biases. I've numbered 152 of them. So why is everybody going systematic? Because they know that there's a lot of issues going in our brains that can hamper our ability to make good decisions. So when applied to investments, how should you look at that? So basically, if you look at an illustration from the article I mentioned, you can think of the bullseye as an investment objective and your ability to meet your investment objective. So in this illustration, it's a wonderful world. You set out on an investment path and you hit the bullseye. Now, what noise does, the noise in your judgments, is that it just throws you off that that ultimate objective that you're trying to meet. So it can take many ways, but in general, it's just not making suboptimal decisions. If we differentiate that from bias, what emotional biases can lead us or force us or cause us to do, is take consistently suboptimal decisions over and over again, just succumbing to some of these biases. Some of the interesting ones that I took out were, and that us at Clarivate are constantly faced with, is many times clients call us and there seems to be an urge to do something. There is a bias for that, it's called action bias. Sometimes people just want to do something because they think that inaction is not the most optimal course of action, but sometimes it is. Just staying put and keeping what you have in the portfolio is the best way to go about it. Another good one is anchoring, that you probably heard. Somehow you put up a position, you have your cost basis, and somehow your brain thinks that it's actually a relevant piece of information once you're in the position. That's called anchoring bias, very well documented. And there's one that I found that I think it's the first time I came across it. I think it's pretty relevant to managed futures, particularly trend followers. It's called the Babe Ruth effect, named after Babe Ruth. And the reason why it's relevant to trend followers is because trend followers are known to have the ability to seize a trend and ride it all the way to the end. And the asymmetry in the payoff of their trades has a few trades giving a lot of return, and to achieve or to be able to get those trades, they have to strike out quite a bit. They just have to put up those trades, control the risk, get out when it doesn't work out, rinse and repeat until that big trade or that big trend occurs. In conclusion on this topic, so obviously it goes without saying, if you're dealing with noise and bias, it's not a good recipe for investments. Decision-making noise can be costly, behavioral biases can be costly. So what does the systematic crowd do? In quite simple terms, that's as simple as I can boil it down to. They just use checklists. A computer program is just a basic checklist that encompasses all of the knowledge and opinions you might have about how the market works and how it behaves. And checklists through time have been documented to be quite effective and powerful tools. A simple definition that I thought touches on the biases and noise that I mentioned from Wikipedia. A checklist is a type of job aid used to reduce failure by compensating for potential limits of human memory and attention. It helps to ensure consistency and completeness in carrying out a task. Obviously, if your program is done properly, it's not going to fail you through time when presented with the same information. A few quotes just to give historical context on why checklists make sense and having a very detailed rule set makes sense. You must have heard some of these in one fashion or another. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. The systematic players are at their best when they're in this research lab designing how they view the world, not when they have a quote screen in front of them and looking at the market. You want to focus on the plan. Once the plan is done and you're comfortable with it, execute the plan. Another good one is if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So if you don't have a clear step-by-step approach to how you navigate the markets, you can't take a step back after all is said and done and see and analyze what went right, what went wrong, and whether you can do anything about it to improve your systems or your plan for the future. Charlie Munger has a good one as well. He puts things in very clear ways. I'm a great believer in solving hard problems by using a checklist. You need to get all the likely and unlikely answers before you, otherwise it's easy to miss something important. And a more recent one from Atul Gawande in his Checklist Manifesto. No matter how expert you may be, well-designed checklists can improve outcomes. And I would add to that, yes, even if you think you're an expert and you have the 10,000 hours of expertise and that you may refer to become an expert, even the best experts in the world, they can still have a use for checklists. The airline industry still uses checklists. The operating rooms still use checklists to improve the error rates. Building a checklist. So closer to what I do in my fund, I'm going to, again, keep it very high level. So how does a checklist can look like for a managed futures program? First point is, what do you want to look at? So I currently look at 150 markets around the world, so in different asset classes, mainly equities, commodities, currencies, and bonds. You have to basically decide how you're going to monitor them. What are you going to monitor? I particularly pay attention to volume, open interest, and before I include a market in my environment or my trading system, I want to make sure that there's some logical economic activity that underlies the futures contracts that I use to expose my portfolio to those assets. The second main point is, particularly when you're a trend follower, you're buying up moves and you're selling down moves. So obviously you can go into great details and all kinds of funky indicators and rocket science to define what goes up, what goes down. My approach is fairly simple. It's quantified, but if I would put a chart, or just if you put a chart on your screen, you take a few steps back. If you're not sure it's going up or going down, you shouldn't be in it. If there's a clear uptrend, you should be in it. If there's a clear downtrend, you should be shorting it. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. There's a lot of players in the field that go from very complicated to not so complicated, like what I do. Different merits, different approaches. You can obviously have a innumerable combination of things on that front. So next thing, which is I think more important in a managed futures, especially if you trade that many contracts, you want to make sure that you get the currency risks right, the exposure right. So you don't want to have too much concentration in any given risk. I size up the risks at the position, sector, and portfolio level to make sure that I'm comfortable with the amount of capital that's at risk based on where I intend to exit my position. And what most trend followers do is that they keep the winners and they cut the losers. So if I put up a position that I think is going up, if it doesn't keep going up, it's going to get out. And if I short something, it has to keep going down. If not, I'm going to be out. And it's rinse and repeat. I do this daily. The main busy time for the strategy is about 5:30 when most of the markets close on the eastern front. Then the next day starts up. So I put my orders in the market on where I want to be for the next session. Do that daily. So that's all nice, but what can such an approach or such a simple checklist can get you? Well, the returns from managed futures are very different from equities. And the striking point that I'm going to insist on is that particularly when equities are going down, so it's particularly relevant if you or your clients think that we're at the tail end of a bull market, you want to have an ability or someone with an ability to navigate markets when equities are going down. There are ways to address those situations. So in this particular illustration that comes from a good paper from EMA called Managed Futures Riding the Wave. The red line is the trailing 12-month correlation with MSCI between the MSCI World and an index called the SG Trend. The SG Trend is a composite of 10 large and representative trend followers in the managed futures space. So you can see from this chart, the left axis, if it's not clear enough, goes from -1 to 1. So through time, the correlation between a managed futures program and equities will go from negative to positive, which in general, when people present one number, they say that managed futures are in general not correlated. But it's even better than that, because they're actually positively correlated when the equities are going up and tend to be negatively correlated when the equities are going down. So that's one of the main reasons why you would want to consider adding managed futures in your portfolio. Excuse me. Then what's in it for you? So if you and your clients are not happy with the amount of return you're getting for the amount of volatility that you have to assume in equities, then managed futures gradually put in your portfolio can help you reduce the return, reduce the volatility, and increase the return. It's something that's not quite obvious. When most people look at a managed futures program outright, they tend to be more volatile or as volatile as equities. And at the surface, it's not always obvious that adding more volatility or an equal amount of volatility will actually have a decreasing effect on your overall portfolio. Managed futures is one of the only asset classes that I know can achieve this property. Why should you go with Claret for a managed futures program? Since inception, the program was launched in January 2012. We've done pretty well for a managed futures program. It's a space that has its set of struggles through the past couple of years. We've managed to add 80% value over the SG trend, same index that I mentioned, which is the top 10 large and representative trend followers in the space. How does it compare with peers? Where from this perspective, I won the best 5-year return in the managed futures category in Canada last year. 2016, second place, best 1 year. 2015, best 1 year. First place, best 1 year. And I also monitor my global peers because I want to make sure that I'm kept abreast of what my competitors are doing in case any bits of information that are interesting to know fall off the table. I'm also doing decent there, top 20 from my Barclay Hedge. Barclay Hedge, in this particular ranking, compiles about 300-something managed futures programs, so I'm pretty proud of achieving top 20 over the past couple of quarters on a trailing 5-year basis. And about a year and some ago, I was ranked 8th on the Preqin CTA, that's top performing CTA rankings. Similar amount of CTAs showed in there. Then, to wrap this up, the key takeaways, hopefully you get something out of it, and that decision-making noise and behavioral biases can be costly. I recommend you have that conversation with your managers to see how they can isolate those risks from decision-making wherever possible. Checklists are powerful allies. You could ask your manager if he has a checklist or if he can explain it to you in simple layman's terms. Managed futures tend to zig when equity markets zag, so that's a good property. It's good for your portfolio by reducing its volatility while not decreasing its return. And Claret's results are competitive. Any questions?
Two for you, Pierre. First is, client asked me the other day regarding the correlations that increase in positive and decrease in negative periods. They asked me why. When something has effectively a zero correlation, why would that be? The answer I gave was that correlation is actually about negative 0.1, and it's that slight negative that causes it. I don't know if that was right in your view or if it's accurate, so I'd be interested in how you answer that. And the second question is, if you put your orders in every day at the end of the market and you use this checklist, how important is your presence there each and every day in order to run the strategy?
Not very important because all of the process is documented, so I can train any analyst. I've trained 1 or 2 analysts over the past couple of years. So the knowledge is very easy to transfer, much more so than expertise that requires 20 years of experience, as we've seen on the panel earlier. Obviously, there's a lot of experience that transpires through these kind of approaches. Once you have a system that's fairly simple to understand and explain to your clients, that you're comfortable with the approach, it goes without saying that you can train a professional to execute such a strategy. Yeah.
Why does the correlation?
Why does the correlation? I was trying to dodge that question. I don't think I have a very smart answer for you. I don't think it tends to be positively correlated with equity markets. Why does it rise? Why does it fall? I think particularly if we go back to the slide to illustrate a few instances where that
that has happened. So let's say we take the
middle blue range, which is where the main crisis, or the recent significant crisis. The reason why it was positive is because leading up to 2017, we were in a bull market, equity bull market, without a doubt. The reason why it gradually stops being positively correlated is that as that bull market cracks, then you, as a trend follower, would take some of that equity long risk off the table. So that's where the decorrelation starts to happen, where it's not really positive or negative. And then once the bear market establishes itself, then you start putting negative or short positions on the market.
But it's a fraction of managed futures is equity futures to begin with. So how comfortable could you be that saying that correlation isn't spurious and just happens to be that?
I think from going from memory, like a lot of the topic during those periods is that correlations went to 1 across multiple assets. And in general, with the managed futures, you would prefer correlations remaining fairly low across different assets, except if you're well positioned, obviously. Nobody minds being positively correlated if all your bets are right. So I think when I use the equities as an example, but the energies were on a bull run going into that peak and then crashed quite significantly, just like equities afterwards. So it's not only equities. Here I'm showing equities because it's the most documented behavior. You could do a similar analysis. I think I've seen a paper by one of my competitors that did that with fixed income as well. See how this kind of ebb and flow of positive and negative correlation to a bond portfolio can be beneficial to a traditional portfolio, and it is. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.